Bandsaw is an old tool. It dates from early in the Industrial Revolution. In a table saw, when you rip, there are a couple of things that can happen when you start to rip any board. But if the kerf starts to compress because of tension inside of this board, on a table saw, that blade at the back is grabbing a hold of that piece of wood, and it's going to be thrown up and back at you. And that's what we call a kickback. Of course, a splitter ameliorates that problem significantly, and you really should never rip without a splitter in a table saw. It's just plain dangerous. But when you rip in a bandsaw, all the force is directly down on the table. So it becomes a very safe proposition. You can do a great deal of ripping in even a modest bandsaw of this size. You could rip a plank up to 6 or 8 feet long with this. The other thing about using a bandsaw to rip is that the kerf is minuscule compared to the average table saw blade. So if you're making tomato steaks, you're going to get an extra tomato steak or two out of every board that you rip up. While we consider them to be rather safe, they actually don't have the best safety record in the world. And the accidents are almost always from somebody pushing their hand or thumb. A lot of cuts here in this area from accidentally pushing it. I did it once. It wasn't very bad. I just barely touched it. But it was 3 weeks of hell while I kept butterfly bandages on it. So it's to be avoided. I think why it happens are a couple of things. One is that you just kind of lose track and you get busy and you don't think. Another thing, if you're cutting any kind of a scroll type work like bowl blanks and so on, it's very easy to forget where your thumb is and come around into the blade because it cuts out of the piece if you have an uneven edge like a piece of green wood that you're cutting. So very much want to think in that direction. I avoid around any machinery using long muscles for the most part. If I was cutting down the middle of this and I know my thumb's on each corner, then I would probably push it pretty normally, because even if something happens, I'm going to go by both sides of it. But if I have any doubt or it's a small piece, what I start doing is things like putting my hand under the table and pushing like this. I do a lot of this with my body. That I push, rocking my body forward, and I'm not in a position where that if things go awry that I'm going to go flying off. I'm using sort of compressive type pushing. The other danger of a bandsaw is that you have what are called the guides, and the guides consist of a ball bearing in back of the blade that touches right back in here, and as you put pressure on the blade, that keeps it from riding further back into the saw. And of course, there's guides at either side that can be ball bearings in this case, or they can be little blocks of steel or blocks of carbon or even blocks of wood. And if you're scroll cutting and you want to back up, there is the danger. If you back up and that blade is sort of caught in the kerf, you will pull that right off the tire, really. It'll come forward and there'll be a huge crashing noise. The blade will go into this guard. Often we'll mark the door in here or down in here, and you usually can write the blade off. It's usually toast at that point. So you really want to back up with great care. I usually try to think out my cuts so that I don't have to back up. The classic way these happens is you're cutting a big circle like this, and somehow you get around and suddenly it's going to hit here. And you sort of, oops, what do I do now? And you don't want to cut through the middle of your circle, so you end up trying to back up, and it just doesn't go well. The other trick, if you're caught in a piece to back up, and it's a fairly long kerf, is drive a wedge in behind it, and it'll open it up a lot of times that you can back up a lot better. Talk about capacities for a minute. A throat is a common capacity in bandsaws that's touted a lot, and it's the distance from the blade to edge of the column here. And I almost think personally that more important is the height of cut. And the more height of cut within reason you can have in your bandsaw, the better. And as you start to get in higher grade bandsaws, they usually give you a little more height of cut. With these little, this design was originally executed by Delta Milwaukee back in the 1920s. And it's really two castings that are bolted together in the middle here, and it allows you to stick what's called a riser block. That's a 6-inch riser block in here, so that you can increase this capacity to 1 foot. I have such a saw in my turning shop, and it's fine for turning bowl blanks, which don't require any tremendous precision. But when you start wanting to do fine scroll work with that saw and run small blades, its performance is greatly diminished because of the fact that as you start to put that block in there, you don't have nearly the rigidity in that frame and the alignment in that frame that you did before. When you first buy a saw, all the books will tell you how you take the table off and you put a straight edge on the bottom wheel and you see if the top wheel will line up with it. I have actually seen a good many saws that the wheels were off an 1/8 inch or so. We found one in Bob's shop yesterday that was top wheel was 1/8 inch of the back of the front wheel. We shimmed it out by making a washer in a wood turning lathe. And to be honest, I don't see that it runs any better before or after the exercise, and I think that this wheel alignment problem, at least in the 14-inch bandsaws, is probably exaggerated a bit. As you get into bigger saws, it probably would be more of a problem. And certainly as you get into bigger saws, you're usually paying more money and more quality is put into those. And so I think it becomes less of a problem to start with. By putting cool blocks in here, or even wood blocks, it's much better than metal guides, because the problem is that all of these more inexpensive guides tend to drift a little. And yes, you tighten things down with pliers and so on, and even then sometimes this back bearing will drift back. This whole blade starts going back into the guides, and as it touches a steel guide, it knocks all the set out of the blade, and the blade at that point is essentially toast. So the nice part about wood guides or cool blocks is that this material can be cut with the blade without harming the blade in any way. So you don't lose the blade if the guides go a little out of adjustment. A lot of these machines now are built out of weldments, and again, like we talked in lathes today, that a weldment isn't necessarily bad. A well-constructed welded saw can be very nice indeed. In fact, here's one, the Powermatic. It's a nice solid saw, and it's again, this is built in Taiwan or China, and but it's very nicely done. And as you inspect this and look inside it, you'll find that in some ways it may have more rigidity than a lot of the cheaper cast iron ones. There was a general feeling amongst the public that 3-wheel bandsaws are bad, and I think that's more an outgrowth of the fact that most 3-wheel bandsaws were very cheap affairs sold at home centers and you know, were real home workshop tools back up to 10 years ago. You can take, on the other hand, the Inca bandsaw, which is a big 3-wheel bandsaw, one of the finest bandsaws you can buy. It's a very accurate saw, a very finely made saw, and it's a 3-wheel design. The nice part about bearings is if they freeze up on you, you can go down to the Bearings Inc. and buy another one for $1.50. So it's not uncommon. After 10 years of use of the saw in my shop, this last summer we had to completely rebuild the guides, and top and bottom guide had seized within about a week of each other, and we had to put new bearings in it, but no big thing. We went down to Technology Inc. and grabbed a new set of bearings. The tension thing. Attention, another thing, and the latest gimmick is to put devices on the saw that release the tension when you're not using it. I know that bandsaws have been running since the Industrial Revolution with full tension on them, and I just don't see it, that this releasing the tension. I think it's a gimmick that somebody has come up with, and they're going to sell you this gizmo, and I can't see that it's necessary. There's enough strength in the frame that I don't see with the frame's not going to bend from the tension. It's not going to hurt the blade. If the spring wears out, you put a new spring in after 20 years. In a week-long turning course for like bowl turning, we're cutting greenwood blanks that are like this thick, you know, one after another all day long, and the volume of dust going through that saw is unbelievable. And it took 12 years to blow a tire. And here we have a circle cutting attachment that we made yesterday at Bob's shop that makes good circles. And to make a circle, we simply put a piece of wood down like this, and we'll just tap that, but we're not going to pound on the bandsaw table. And as you can see, I nailed a cleat which I hand planed to fit the slot reasonably well. And now this is a bit of a wide blade for this, but it may work. I'm going to come right up. Go. Pardon? Yes. I buy for my turning shop, I buy a 3-tooth skip, and you could take a half-power saw and cut like crazy with it. Unbelievable how it cuts. It's such an aggressive blade. So a lot of it will be how you, the type of blade you use. The other thing that it's possible to sharpen a bandsaw. We did a blade at Bob's shop yesterday, and I just take a Dremel with about an abrasive wheel in it about that round, and I dress it flat on the front with a dresser, and then I just set here, and I just peck away at that, and I face dress the edge of the gullet here, and I dress it as square as I can to the machine, and I just keep going up like that. And when you see ground teeth come through, it takes 20 minutes maybe. On a 1/16th blade, I only use the back guide. I just back the others right out of the way. Olsons are very good blades. I've bought those by the 100-foot coil toy. They're extremely well-made blades. The other thing you can buy for a bandsaw, you can buy abrasive strips that you can put in here and use them as a sander. And it's a neat trick for some kinds of projects where you got to sand weird stuff and get in. It can be a very nice way to edge sand. And you got a long enough belt that doesn't burn real easy. We think that you can get them from the sanding catalog, which is Klingspor. One thing, I think a lot of people resaw with way too fine a blade. They buy one that's 10, 15 teeth per inch, and you just don't have a big enough gullet to pull waste at that point. And when you're trying to resaw something 12-inch hide, you want something that's in the 3 to 5 tooth per inch. With a good deal of set in it to resaw something like that. They're really going to move some material. Appreciate everybody bearing with me through all of our turning exercises.